like to welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and commence with our Planning Commission meeting for tonight, March 19th. We have all 7 members of the Planning Commission in attendance. First up on the agenda is our consent calendar. Commissioner Thomas.
Make a motion that we accept the minutes from last meeting.
We have a motion from Commissioner Thomas, a second from Commissioner Badone. Any discussion to the motions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries 7-0. Our public hearings, we've got several of them.
I move to remove or postpone agenda items number 2 and 3 from the agenda.
Commissioner England.
I second, and just to note that they were withdrawn, both number 2 and 3.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion also carries unanimously. We are going to move forward to item number 4 on the agenda. This is the Rush Funplex at 3774 West Centerview Way. This is a preliminary site plan and conditional use permit request in an SC3 zone. Foursquare Properties is the applicant, Dan Milich. It's good to see you again, sir. The floor is yours.
Good to be here, Chairman, members of the Commission, members of the public and staff. My name's Dan Milich. I'm the Director of Development for Foursquare Properties. Our local offices are at 7533 South Centerview Court here in West Jordan. We're here this evening seeking approval of a conditional use permit and site plan for the Rush Funplex development. It's a family entertainment use and recreational use. It's proposed within the plaza area of our Jordan Landing Retail Center. This parcel is zoned SC3, regional commercial, and carries a corresponding land use designation of regional commercial as well. Rush Funplex is a family entertainment and recreational use. All entertainment and recreational uses are to be conducted 100% within the building and therefore available for year-round use. The city zoning code defines this use as recreation and entertainment indoor and allows for the approval of this use subject to review and approval of a conditional use permit. The zoning code also requires approval of the site plan application as part of this development entitlement. That's why we're here before you this evening. Rush Funplex is proposed to be located in a new building constructed within Jordan Landing on a little over 1 acre of land. This site is adjacent to and immediately west of Jordan Landing Boulevard and adjacent to and north of Centerview Way, and it's immediately south of the Cinemark Theater. The building is proposed as a single-level structure and will include a mezzanine level that covers a little more than half of the building footprint. The mezzanine level is to contain the go-kart track and the spectator area and a party room space also. The total building square footage is proposed at 73,719 square feet, with 44,923 square feet of that at the ground floor level and 28,796 square feet composing the mezzanine level. The building is proposed to be constructed of masonry block and will be articulated in a manner that's consistent with both the city's wall plane projection or recesses requirements and the exterior design scheme that's being implemented currently at the Entertainment Village redevelopment. Proposed activities within this building include bowling, billiards, laser tag, go-karts, mini golf, an arcade area, bumper cars, climbing wall, foam pit, and other similar indoor recreational uses, as well as it'll include the party room as mentioned earlier and a restaurant and cafe space adjacent to the arcade center on the main level, ground floor. Upon obtaining required entitlement and permit approvals, our goal is to immediately file for building permits to allow the site to be developed. Our goal is to begin site work in April next month and pull vertical permits in May so that we can be open by Christmas. Aggressive schedule, but I think that we can pull it off. We've got a good team, and we've got everybody talked to at the city that we needed to let them know that that's our goal, so that they're ready for that. We believe the site and building development and this indoor recreation use have been proposed in a manner consistent with the findings of approval as listed in the city zoning code for CUPs and site plans, and we further believe this site and proposed building have been designed in a manner consistent with applicable codes, standards, and requirements. We respectfully request your approval of the site plan and conditional use permit applications this evening. The design team is here tonight with me, our architect and our civil engineer. If there are specific questions about the architecture or engineering that you may have, we can have them help address those. We believe this is a great addition to Jordan Landing and a great expansion to the plaza area and the entertainment village. And again, we respectfully request your approval this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Or for the engineer or any of his other helpers there? Okay.
I've got one.
Oh, Commissioner England.
Is this the same franchise, maybe franchise, there's one up north, is that correct? Is there another one of these up in?
That's correct.
Northern Utah?
Commissioner, there's one in Syracuse, and this is the same operator that's proposing to develop this facility.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Any other questions? All right, we will save you some time after the public hearing. Mr. Forsyth.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so as Dan mentioned, this is located in the SC3 zone, which is the regional commercial zone of West Jordan that's geared towards serving a population of 100,000 people. So as far as appropriateness to the zone, we feel this is probably the best zone for this type of use. Typically, these zones are able to handle the amount of traffic and parking. And this site is particularly situated in that it's next to Jordan Landing Boulevard and Plaza Center Drive. Both are 4-lane roads that can handle quite a bit of traffic, so it should be one of the best spots in the city for it. As far as parking goes, we did this a little bit differently. So the code requires for indoor recreation uses as a whole, one space for every 100 square feet of building floor area, which if followed to the letter, that would have put the parking amount well over 700 spaces. So in order to kind of make it a little more nuanced and make the parking match what is most likely to be generated, we based the parking on the individual uses within the building. So, and that parking study is explained further in the staff report. So, as far as just some other general things, dumpsters and equipment are placed in pretty good areas. You can see on here the dumpster location is just at the back, outside of any pedestrian areas. Rooftop equipment, you can't see it on here, but based on their designs, they've proposed to centralize those in the middle of the roof, just so that pretty much anyone from anywhere around the building would not be able to see those, considering the height and the distance from the edge of the roof line. The architecture looks really good. The design review committee went over that on February 26th and forwarded a unanimous positive recommendation. And then as Dan explained, the building breakups and facade breaks meet city code requirements. So based on these findings and those explained further in the staff report, staff recommends approval of the preliminary site plan and the conditional use permit for the Rush Funplex.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Green.
I'm going to direct this one to the city attorney. If the parking standard in ordinance is one parking space for every 100 square feet, and I'm not saying that this isn't appropriate or anything, What I'm wondering is, are we in compliance with the ordinance that requires that by doing what we're doing, or are we somehow manipulating this to say, yeah, we're gonna make it fit and kinda set the ordinance? Do you see where I'm going with this?
I could probably defer a little more to Larry, who I think understands this part of the ordinance better than I do, but there are provisions within the ordinance that allow us to adjust to particular uses that don't neatly fit within a particular category, where we can anticipate and identify that there's really not practically gonna be the amounts of parking that our chart would normally dictate. There is such a provision in our code that allows for some discretion by you as the zoning administrator, right, Larry?
Yes, there is, and it's located towards the end of but there is a provision where the zoning administrator can make a determination based upon the use, if the parking doesn't necessarily line up with what the use is. And then you gotta remember also, Jordan Landing is one big sea of parking.
Right.
And so there's a lot of shared parking, a lot of overlapping parking that will take place. And so, to require a building that will more or less probably have a sizable drop-off traffic with the children or older kids being dropped off by their parents, not necessarily participating in the Rush Funplex. There may be quite a few, but I feel comfortable with the parking analysis that's been done and is approved in the staff report.
And it's not that I don't have a problem with the parking analysis, and I know where the building's gonna go, and I know what kind of, I'll say, and it'll change a little bit as Jordan Landing changes their development a little bit, but when you look at all the parking spaces to the east, over there where Joe's Crab Shack used to be and all those others, yeah, there's hundreds of parking spots. I just wanna make sure that we're in compliance with the ordinance, and if it requires a zoning administrator sign off, then I think formally we ought to include that as part of a packet or something, just so we can say we've met the city ordinance and that we didn't act in some sort of funky manner just because we said, hey, they're building this great thing in Jordan. You see where I'm going with
Yeah,
that?
and you can certainly make that as a condition of approval that I provided a zoning administrator determination and an official document, and I'll get it to the applicant and to the planning commission in the future, but I feel comfortable, and I don't have any issue doing that, and so.
Did you say that provision's permitted at the end of the ordinance?
Yes, it's
Do we really need to have an action?
Well, yeah, I think that's fine too, because I see Calvin's point. There might be somebody come down and say, well, how did this get approved? And then we can just pull the determination out. That would be the easiest way to go.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay, so this is noticed as a public hearing. So we will invite those of you who are here to talk about this item to go ahead and come forward to the microphone, and just please note that you have 3 minutes to speak. You're invited to come forward. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring us back to the Planning Commission for discussion. Commissioner Green and then Commissioner Luthi.
I was just gonna make a motion. I think this is a no-brainer. I was gonna make a motion that, are you okay with that, Commissioner Luthi? I was gonna make a motion based on the findings set forth in the staff report, and, that the Planning Commission approve the preliminary site plan and conditional use permit for the Funplex located at Rush Funplex, located at 3774 West Centerview Way in the SC3 zone, with the conditions of approval listed on page 2 of the staff report, adding an additional condition of approval in the preliminary site plan that it's subject to the zoning administrator's approval of the parking per city ordinance.
Commissioner Luthi.
I'll second that, but I just wanted to put in that I think this is a fantastic use in West Jordan, and I'm super excited to see the amenity coming.
We have a motion. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you as always. Thank you. Moving along to item number 5, National Academy Taekwondo, 6762 South Airport Road Conditional Use Permit for personal instruction service in an M1 zone. Velvet Hernandez is the applicant. The floor is yours. Welcome. Oh, hold on a second. There we go.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay, glad to be here today, seeking for a conditional use permit for our business. Just a little background, this is a family business. We used to operate just off Bangerter and 6200 South, and due to UDOT building the new off-ramp, so we had to seek for a new place. This is already a built building that it's on Airport Road. It's got a wide open space. Our use is very basic. We don't just need kicking targets, no big equipment. We basically started this with our kids to have an after-school activity, and we operate 6 to 9 p.m. So most of the other businesses that are there, usually around that time, they're gone. So there's no issue with parking. There's plenty of parking in the front and the back of the building. And yeah, so I don't know if there's any questions in regards to the business.
I didn't see in there a specific hour. You made a reference to being open after business hours. What are your hours? What are your expected hours? Did I miss that?
6. Yeah, so
I
we
just
start
said-
our first
okay.
class at 6 p.m. We have 3 classes, and we end at 9.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner, just happened, Commissioner Badon.
Is this mostly for children or adults, or is it a mix of both?
It's a mix of both, mostly children. So we have our first 2 classes are children, and the last class is adult.
Commissioner Hatch.
Just a question regarding days of the week. Is this 6 days a week, 7 days a week?
It's Monday through Friday.
Monday through Friday, thank you.
And Commissioner Thomas.
That answered my question.
Awesome. That's questions from, what's that? Oh, are you Velvet?
Yes, I'm Velvet.
She's the applicant on the packet.
Yes.
Velvet Hernandez. Any other questions? Okay, we will save you some time after the public hearing if there's any question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Forsyth, you're up.
All right, thank you, Chairman. So yeah, this site is just located off of Airport Road in the Avigation condos. It's kind of a flex office warehouse space. And so the zone it's located in is the M1 zone, which is a light industrial zone. So martial arts studios are typically defined as personal instruction services, which are usually appropriate for commercial areas, but we do allow them in the M1 zones as long as they get a conditional use permit to mitigate against any potential impacts. So most of the surrounding businesses in this area are either warehouse, office, or manufacturing. The 2 neighboring businesses in particular are both manufacturing and warehouse. Both of those are closed before 5 p.m., so they would be closed an hour before this studio would even open, which is the case with most of the businesses in that complex. The only one that we know of that would be open at the same time would be the Door Christian Fellowship, which is a church just a few doors down. And they only operate on Wednesdays and Sundays. So I'm looking at the parking. Basically, personal instruction services in this case would be required to have 13 spaces. There's at least 10 spaces just in front of the building, which we anticipate most, if not all of the customers would be parking and using that as a drop-off pickup point, which is actually required per code. So with those parking spaces being adjacent to that sidewalk, we feel that should be sufficient to serve that requirement. As far as traffic circulation goes, it's hard to see on the aerial up here, but there are spaces between those buildings that connect the rear parking space, or the rear parking lot to the front parking lot. So there's good circular traffic flow. That should work. So based on these findings and findings explained further in the report, staff is recommending approval of the conditional use permit for National Academy Taekwondo.
Thank you. Any questions, Commissioner Green?
I'll have one question in just a second. I'm just gonna preempt you, and I'm just gonna make a move that we admit the statement from the property manager, the apartments next door as part of the record. We'll just do that now. Are we okay with that? The question that I have is, and it goes to the statement that the property manager had. They said there's 4 unassigned parking lots to that particular unit, and they talk about units 6708, 6752, 56, 84, 88, 92, and the one in question is 6762. Which ones are which on this map? Do we know? I'm just kind of curious. Obviously, that one's 6762, right? So 6708's gonna be way to the bottom of this page, just based on address, right?
Right, yeah, so the ones that are mentioned in that letter are kind of scattered
Okay.
throughout the complex.
That's
One of those is next door that they
Right.
mentioned.
All right, that's what I was just trying to clarify, is just to get a good picture of where all these units are located and what the potential impact might be on other tenants. But I think this map provides the best one, so I think that works for me.
Commissioner England?
Which one of those units is the church?
The church is just, it's the one on the end, so this one right here, if you can see it. Yeah.
Any additional questions? Okay, this is also a public hearing. If anybody would like to speak on the item, it is your turn. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring this back to the Planning Commission for discussion. Commissioner Thomas.
I had just one question for the applicant. How many of your students are being dropped off and picked up, and how many of them are staying there during the lessons?
Hold on just really quickly. Do we need a motion to bring her back up? Are we okay? Okay. No, we're fine.
You're
Yeah.
okay.
So I would say about 6 of the kids. They're usually about 10 per class, and 6 are dropped off. Maybe about 4 parents stay there and watch.
So roughly maybe even half.
Yeah, most of them, they use the time to go do grocery shopping or,
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner England.
I just want to state I like it. I don't see any conflict. It's after hours. Most of these businesses, with the exception of the church, are closed. So based on the letter that was written by the property manager, I'm inclined to vote in favor of it.
Commissioner Luthi.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially with the parking lining right up against the building entrance. There's not gonna be problems with dropping off because they can pull right into a stall, drop off and get out. I think this is a good fit, so I'd like to make a motion, if that's okay with everybody. Based on the information and findings set forth in the staff report and upon evidence and explanations received today, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use permit for National Academy Taekwondo located at 6762 South Airport Road in an M1 zone, subject to the conditions of approved list on page 2 of the staff report.
Commissioner England.
I'll second that.
We have a motion with a second. Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are unanimous once again. Julie, do you need this letter for your reference? Okay, I'll just bring it down with my minutes here. All right, moving on to item number 6. This is a text amendment. Oh, yeah, Commissioner Luthi.
I was gonna say thank you for sticking around to West Jordan, even if you got the boot from UDOT.
Text amendment, comprehensive sign code update, amending multiple sections of the 2009 City Code, Title 12 and Title 13, Chapter 17, citywide applicability. The City of West Jordan is the applicant, and Mr. Forsyth, this is you again.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so what kind of triggered this large change to the sign code was the 2015 Reed versus the Town of Gilbert Supreme Court ruling. So a little bit of background on this is essentially the Town of Gilbert had multiple content-based sign categories, particularly for non-commercial speech. And so this was essentially what Pastor Reed was arguing, that these rules were essentially unfair and were controlling what his sign could and could not say. And so it made it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and essentially their ruling, the Town of Gilbert lost in that case, and their ordinance was struck down, but their main ruling on that was that if the ordinance requires you to read the message of the sign in order to determine if it is in compliance with the ordinance or not, then that ordinance is subject to strict scrutiny. Now, there were a few justices that did agree with that, but offered some dissenting opinions. So some of the notable exceptions were on-premise signs versus off-premise signs, so billboards was one of those. Other things included safety signs, where there was a public health and safety nexus there. And then it was kind of implied that commercial versus non-commercial was included as part of that. So the main purpose, obviously, of this is to bring our sign code more into compliance with this Supreme Court ruling. And so to do that, what we've proposed is some new sign categories, particularly for those that under the current ordinances are largely content-based. So these would include things like for sale signs, garage sale signs, and things like that. So we've kind of engineered those to be based on either the condition of the land or the physical characteristics of the sign. So, and then we've also, a lot of the definitions, they kind of go hand in hand with that. So those definitions have been changed to reflect, again, those physical characteristics or the condition of the land. And then other ordinances that were completely content-based on their face, those have been removed entirely. So the second main purpose of this was to just kind of, since we were making so many changes to the code, we felt it best to essentially make the format a little bit more user-friendly and to consolidate some of the code sections that we have. So right now, most of the requirements are in Title 12, but there's also the zoning controls, which are found in a separate title under Title 13, Chapter 17. And so what we've decided to do is essentially combine all those sections into one section, which is 12.3.2. So this would essentially include each sign type, and it would include all the regulations associated with that sign type. So that would include zoning controls, size, density, and setbacks, and then other miscellaneous requirements as well. So then the third purpose of this was to make some miscellaneous adjustments, particularly with some inconsistencies with our code or things that may be confusing or other things where the code didn't quite match what staff was approving or interpreting. And so the main purpose of that is just kind of bring everything in line with each other and to make make it a lot more user-friendly. So some of these include drive-through signs, which are essentially menu boards. Right now in our current code, there's no controls whatsoever on menu boards, so this would actually establish some set of rules and standards to govern those. Another example would be youth sports signs. Those are right now loosely referred to in our code, but under these new regs, they would specifically address those. So, and then the other purpose of this was just to clarify a lot of codes that are confusing or to eliminate conflicts with any other codes. So with that, one thing I should point out that Larry mentioned is that the billboard ordinance has largely been left untouched. The only thing in that we've changed is the definitions to match what is in the state code verbatim. So again, just for that consistency purpose.
Okay, any questions for staff? Okay. We'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. We do have 3 people who've already written down their names, so I'll call you up in order. You have 3 minutes. Just remember to keep your comments to the 3 minutes. We've got Guy Larson, and then Jeff Young, and then Charlie Taylor. And Mr. Larson, we didn't get your address, so if you'll just state your address for the record so we can get that, please.
Sure, I apologize that. My name's Guy Larson. I work for and represent Reagan Outdoor Advertising here tonight. 1775 North Warm Springs Road is where I work, but I did reside in West Jordan. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you tonight. And when Larry walked in, he assured me that he wasn't touching the billboard section or no changes. And I've worked with Larry for, 20 years. But the thing that I wanted to bring up tonight is I know you're not touching the billboard portion, but I'm wondering if maybe you should be doing something about your billboard section. And the reason why I bring this to your attention is a number of years, I'll just tell you a real fast story. A number of years ago, we were approached. We have a sign located right across the street here on the Jiffy Lube, by Jiffy Lube, on the corner of 78th and Redwood. You're all nodding like you've seen it. We were approached years ago. The city wanted us to move that sign. They didn't like it. I don't know how you feel about it today, but at the time, the city requested us to move that sign. And we started looking, me personally, looked and looked and looked. And unfortunately, we could not find a home for that billboard. And we looked for years, 3 years. Personally, I looked. And the reason why we couldn't find a new home is because, to be quite candid with you, and not disrespecting the ordinance, but the opportunity to relocate signs, billboards in general, is very hard in West Jordan City. And I've gone through your ordinance, and the reason there's a number of reasons why. There's restrictions from residential zones. There's a limited number of zones that we can build in. I mean, I can go on and on and on. So because of those reasons, we weren't able to successfully move that sign, and here it sits today. And we are still willing to move that sign. I'm here to put that on record, that we are still willing to move that sign, but we can't, and we gave up, to be honest with you. So I'm wondering if maybe the billboard section can be taken out and allow us, the industry, Reagan, I'm not speaking for the industry, but I am speaking for Reagan, to come in and sit down with staff, put a sign committee together and see if we can't tweak the billboard section. One of the things that we would like to see is the growth. I used to live out on 60th West and 81st South, and the growth out there is unbelievable. Mountain View corridor has come in since when I lived there, and maybe the opportunity to I guess I'm done. To move the sign to the Mountain View corridor, just open it up a little bit, deal with spacing, deal with height, to allow the movement of signs. So I guess I'm respectfully asking if we can take the billboard portion out and maybe spend a little time on it to see if we can't make it more user-friendly for the city and for Reagan. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
My name's Charlie Taylor. Can I beg your indulgence to approach first?
As long as Mr. Young is okay with that, I think we're okay. I just read them off in the order they come to me, so.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your patience. Once again, Charlie Taylor with YESCO. I am also here to speak to some documents that were forwarded to your attention by a gentleman from International Sign Association. So if I may, folks, number one, the initial issue that we had in front of us was we noted that there was no severability clause in the document. We would recommend that there be a severability clause just so that if there is a problem with any particular clause, we do not have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can merely select the bad clause and get rid of it. So that would be our number one issue. Number two, we noted that in the sign area, we were restricted to calculating the sign area by the smallest rectangle or square, which can tie up a whole lot of blank area in the allotted square footage. Our recommendation would be a multi-geometric shaped calculation to where every portion of the sign would be calculated as an area, but there wouldn't be a whole lot of dead space that the tenant or sign owner would be penalized for. So we would beg your consideration in that regard. We also noted that the window sign we recommend that the addition of a window sign definition so that it is clear what constitutes a window sign. It's a little bit nebulous in the verbiage at this point. So it would be our suggestion to you folks. And also, there is a timeline issue that we would hope could be addressed with the code, stating that we recommend that the reasonable timeline be stated for review, such as recommended APA's street graphics or the law, page 94. The subsections require a timely review and decision on permit application to avoid objections. So basically just saying we project having your permit ready for you in 2 weeks, and here it comes. Lastly, we have a transit and mixed use issue. We would recommend that in the
Please go ahead.
Thank you. That in the transit zone that be construed as a 50% calculation as well, the same as the mixed use. At this point, we are merely at a 25%. The 25% is quite small when you consider the area of a window, and in the transit zone, we note that there's a lot of traffic and a lot of people going back and forth, and it would be advantageous to make that a 50% as well. And let's see, appreciate your patience, I'm sorry. We would also recommend that, and I must compliment you folks, The way this has been thought through and laid out, it's going to be a major improvement from what it was existing. But the animated signs, we would recommend that instead of a conditional use, that they would be a permitted use and be allowed by right. So that is, that's my input based on the information that was provided to us by the International Sign Association, and that what many municipalities have taken to heart as far as how to interpret and write code.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Larry, did you guys receive that?
Yes, we did.
Okay, just making sure that we've seen it. All right, Mr. Young.
Thank you very much. I'm Jeff Young with Young Electric Sign. We're celebrating our 99th year tomorrow. Is that fun? Come over for cake. We got cake. As Charlie went through quite clearly, these are the recommendations from James Carpentier, who's the government relations guy, if you will, from Washington, D.C. So he's gone over this and looked at it very carefully. And just moving on past where Charlie was, we'd recommend illumination standards. They're in the billboard section. This 0.3 foot candles above ambient light has been adopted by hundreds of communities. Our industry developed that standard, and communities have embraced it. And it's been a great standard for all of us, and it helps on the electronic thing. When signs are going, they need to dim at night. We'd recommend 2 drive-through signs per code. We think on page 34, the standards ought to be a little more objective and clear. We'd recommend, in terms of the base of signs, instead of matching the building, they complement. It's often hard to use the exact same materials. If you've got marble on the building, sometimes it's kind of hard to put marble on the base of a sign, but we can match with the similar materials. Projecting signs are listed at 4 square feet. That's about a stop sign size, and stop fits well on a stop sign, but if you're selling spaghetti or you're selling along like insurance, it's hard. The text gets so small that clarity and readability becomes a real problem. We'd recommend projecting signs be larger, perhaps 8 feet or 15 square feet. And then the big point we'd make perhaps is that monument signs in the code are at 4 feet or 6 feet. And there's all sorts of problems with monument signs at 4 feet. The first problem is when the snowplows come by and they're near the street, the snow just goes right through the face, number one. Number two, when a car is in front of it, you can't read it. I mean, back to the stop sign, the clearance on the base of a stop sign is about 6 feet, roughly. And when you have a monument sign at 4 feet, it's obscured by snow and cars. And so we'd recommend that you reconsider the height of monument signs. And the other little point we'd make, when the grade of the street changes, we often see codes that dictate, in your case, pole signs at 25 feet above the grade. We'd recommend that 25 feet be calculated from the street elevation rather than the grade. And that's been helpful because there's been a few elevation grades within the community. I need to commend, as Charlie said, we see a lot of crazy codes that are really hard to interpret. It puts us in a really hard place to try to explain that to our clients. We can clearly tell that this is a business-friendly community, and we sense it, and we feel it, and we really appreciate it. And this code, not only coming in conformance with Reed and Gilbert, but its clarity makes our jobs a lot easier, and it makes it a lot easier for the business community and our customers to satisfy the requirements. Any questions for me? Anyone coming? Oh, say you
Just cutting you off.
Yeah, missed the cake word.
Congratulations on 99 years.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Is there anybody else? Seems like everybody, except for one. All right. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring this back to the Planning Commission. Just really quickly for staff, since we talked about this document that was forwarded to you, have we given consideration, is any of that included? We didn't see the document, so we don't know where we're at on that.
What they said, and I read over the document today, initially I don't have any issues with the changes. I think they do make improvements to the sign, and I'll let Mark go through with his comments. So I don't have any issues making the additions other than the transit-oriented 1 to 50%. I would have to think long and hard about that, because not only is there's a lot of traffic, but there's also a lot of uses, so it can get cluttered. very quickly if we're ever fortunate to have a development building a TOD. And so, but the majority of them I don't have any issue with, so.
Mr. Forsyth?
Yeah, so particularly the window sign and definition in the sign area definition, we could certainly take a look at that. I would point out too on the monument signs, the 4-foot monument signs, most of those are in the cases where that's the only monument sign allowed in that zone, most of those zones are residential areas. So you're usually not going to see 4-foot monument signs in a commercial area or on an arterial road unless there's a church on an arterial road in a residential zone. But yeah, most of those commercial zones, if not all of them, allow for the larger monument signs, the 8-foot. So
Okay.
that's all I had.
I don't know, who rang in first, Commissioner Green?
You wanna let Mr. Murray say something?
Oh. Mr.
Yeah,
Murray?
I just had one item to add. There was reference to the lack of a severability clause. We always add those when it goes to the council. It's usually not in the document you have here at the planning commission level, so that will be added.
I should add that that severability clause is already in the proposed ordinance. It's section 1227.
Oh. Awesome. All right, Commissioner Green.
Having worked on the wall art ordinance for a long period of time, a couple of years ago, we've made great strides. But I want to go back to the Supreme Court decision first, and then I'm going to address my concerns. The court specifically stated government regulation of speech is contents-based if a law applies to particular speech because of the topic discussed or the idea or message expressed. The court later on went and said some facial distinctions based on message are obvious, defining regulated speech by a particular subject matter, and others are more subtle, defining regulated speech by its function or its purpose. Both are distinctions drawn based on the message that the speaker conveys and therefore are subject to strict scrutiny. So let me tell you parts of the problem that I have with the ordinance, and I'm going to switch to another PDF document here in a second. The first problem I have with the ordinance is I'm a small business owner. And based on the current ordinance, we have to get a permit to have a temporary sign. Yet, you don't have to have a permit to put a for sale sign up in your yard. That's going to be content-based because you're restricting my ability to have a temporary sign, yet that's a for sale sign. For sale sign is going to be a content-based sign. We have construction signs that don't have to have a permit that can go up on a construction project for the length of the project, yet my business can't have a temporary sign on the property.
Yeah, you can have one.
But it has to be permitted. And so I have to pay a fee to put a temporary permit or a temporary sign on my property, yet the construction site next door can put up a temporary sign for 2 years and not have to pay for a permit. So there's some content-based problems there that, and I'll give you another specific one that was pointed out in the presentation of Mark. I'm not attacking you. The sports youth sign. That's specifically content-based because it's a sport youth. I know what we're trying to say is we don't want banners all around the city. But if we're going to regulate one banner, we got to regulate them all. And we got to regulate them all the same way and not make them content-based. When I look at the other parts of the sign ordinance, we have specifically on homes can't have a commercial sign, but they can have a non-commercial sign. That's content-based. When we're looking at billboards and it says it can advertise stuff that's not on its own premises, isn't that content-based? Because you're saying that billboard can't advertise for the business below it, or it falls under another one, but if the billboard is advertising something else, a whole nother rule applies. To me, that's content-based. And so I think we need to go back before we put this to the city council, I think we need to take a real hard look at what are we looking to try to do. I mean, when you look at Justice Alito's concurrence, and he talks about rules based on lighting and rules based on size, I mean, I think some of the public here tonight are right that, you know, we can look at animated signs. I think that's content neutral. We can look at billboards in general. We can look at monument signs in general. But if I put a sign up, I'll give you a perfect example. John Smith Roofing comes into my neighborhood and puts my roof on, and he puts a sign in my yard that says, this roof's been done by John Smith Roofing. That's illegal under this current ordinance because we banned the content of commercial signage. So I think we really need to go back and look to see what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, you know, because you can put up 6 million political signs. I could, for example, in my business right now, I could go put up 100 political signs that protest West Jordan sign ordinance, and I would be legal, but I put up one temporary sign that says, come buy my water here, and I gotta have a permit and pay the city, and I have a drawing to inspect my sign that's going in the right of way. Obviously, that's an exaggeration, but it sets up the point that I can put political signs out, but I can't put a sign that says, buy water here. That's content-based, and if the idea is beautification, and by the way, in Reed versus in the Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court said beautification of a city is not a compelling government interest that requires strict scrutiny. So I think we really need to go back and say, what are we trying to do that we can do with strict scrutiny? Let me give you one other example. In the current ordinance, and it's one section that wasn't changed, we have the sign that could possibly distract. And the ordinance specifically says you can't use the word stop, yield, and something else. Well, you know what? If we have a bank billboard that Young Electric Sign put up that said 3.25% yield, they just violated the ordinance. Because the ordinance specifically says you can't use the word yield. If you say stop and buy something today, we violated the ordinance. I think we need to look and say they can't imitate signs that are regulated under MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices or something, but to ban specific words on a sign, I think we're in a dangerous slope there too, because, you know, obviously we know what the intent is, but you get somebody that says yield on the sign, you can't use that word. Well, yes, they probably can use that, given the context. So I think before we pass this off to the city council, I think we had Yesco here, we had Reagan Signs. They're the two big players in the, I think you're the two big players in the planet, the last time I looked. Every time I drive down the freeway, all I see is Yesco Signs and Reagan Signs and somebody else that does those funky billboard pay by the whatever. I think we need to include their feedback, and I think we really need to sit down and look at what content-based really is, because what I don't want to do is get an ordinance that all of a sudden subjects us immediately to a lawsuit, because I can guarantee you that if there were the ordinance adopted today that I'd have to pay for a permit to have a temporary sign in front of my store, and the youth sports sign was an approved use, city'd have a lawsuit. Because you're regulating my banner, but not that one. I think that we've got to go back and address some of those, and we really have to look and see what the compelling government interest in regulating signs is in West Jordan. And the last thing that I throw in, I'd love to see the pole signs go away. And the reason why I say that, and we can grandfather the ones we've got, but when the neighbors, and we tried to get Maverick to do it, and they followed the ordinance and not our recommendation. But you saw the public outcry when Maverick put that big sign on the corner of 78th and 13th. I just as soon see those kind of pole signs go away. The big signs we have out in front of Jordan Landing, the signs that they have down at Traverse Mountain that look like Las Vegas billboards, I'm okay with those with the big developments. But some of these pole signs that are in some of these other areas, I just as soon see them go by the wayside.
Commissioner Luthi.
I am not nearly as invested or knowledgeable about said signs or their ordinances, but I do think there's been a lot said today, so I think it's probably worth tabling the item till next time. So that's what I'm proposing we do.
I'd table it to a date uncertain.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Commissioner Thomas.
I echo that same thing. Let's table it for right now. And also, I take personal preference. I need to be excused for the rest of the meeting.
Oh, yes. Hurry, but don't speed. Okay. We'll go ahead and excuse Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you.
Ask him on the way out if he can speed. Commissioner Hatch.
I just have to say, this is probably highly inappropriate, and I'll preface it, but Reagan did a great, generous donation for Girls on the Run and did all of our signage. So I just want to say thank you to Reagan for that. That was really, really phenomenal. And our applications and girls that have signed up had jumped significantly once those billboards went up. So thank you very much.
Anybody want to make a motion?
Oh, I thought that was my motion. I motion to table it
We'll make sure we say motion specifically there.
to an uncertain time at a future date.
Commissioner England.
I'll second that.
We have a motion with a second. Any discussion to the motion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 6-0. Thank you for your input. You're free to go, or you can stay and listen to us talk about more text amendments. It will be super fun. Item number 7, text amendment definitions. This is amending the 2009 City Code Title 13-2-3, adding definitions of residential density. This has citywide applicability. City of West Jordan is the applicant once again, and Larry Gardner, you are up, sir.
I didn't bring a presentation. I'm just going to go through this really quickly. A few months ago when we had the project on 9400 South, the senior apartments, we got looking at the issue of density, and we realized that when it got to the council that we really don't define what gross density and net density is in the zoning code. And I firmly believe, and believe me, I've got a whole list of definitions we need to add, so I'm bringing them to you a little bit at a time, but I think just for the protection of the city, we need to define it. If we're ever challenged on it, then we can accurately tell someone what it means. And a gross density is basically the project area divided by the units, number of units, and then and so that includes streets, open space, includes the whole project area, where net density excludes streets and so forth, those type of thing. And it just really is the residential density of the residentially used property. And generally, streets and sidewalks and stuff will take up about 20 to 25% of the development. And so those are what the two definitions are. Do you have any questions for me on this?
Commissioner Luthi.
I do. Is this going to be put, you had mentioned earlier that there's some assumptions that gross density is used on the different zoning. Are you going to now start using that word specifically so that on our zoning maps it talks that this is gross density zoning maps? And
Yes, we will.
okay.
Because they're and we're also looking at the general plan because there's some different wording in the general plan. And what we want to do is, I don't necessarily care what the final outcome is, but we want to make the two consistent.
Okay. No, that's great. That was my only feedback.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and invite the public as it is. We'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring us back to the planning commission for discussion. Commissioner Green.
Based on the information and findings set forth in the staff report and upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move that the planning commission forward a positive recommendation to the city council for this application.
Commissioner Luthi.
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now it's unanimous, 6-0. Moving on to item number 8, text amendment, cannabis processing facilities, and amending the 2009 city code, title 13-5F-2 and 13-5A-2, adding cannabis processing facilities as a conditional use in the M2 and A20 zones with citywide applicability. City of West Jordan, Mr. Garner.
And so just as you said, all this is a simple amendment to the use table in both the M2 or manufacturing zone and the agricultural zones, where it allows the cannabis production establishments, and I put as defined by Utah code because we know how that can change. And so hopefully if it does change, I'll keep abreast of that. And make sure that it's still applicable, but it'd be a conditional use in the M2 zone and the A20 zone. And the conditional use is so that we can make sure, rather than a permitted use, so that we can make sure and put standards or conditions of approval in place that will mitigate any detrimental impact as is outlined in Utah code. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Luthi.
I have 2 questions for you on this one. You know that this is something that I am less than fond of, but my 2 questions for clarification, when it says the A20 zone, meaning a 20-acre minimum, only 4 of those acres out of the 20 can be used for this facility. That was
Correct, and that's under state law.
Farming.
Yeah.
correct.
That's specifically for the farming, isn't it, the 4 acres?
Well, that's all the bigger that a cannabis production facility.
That's everything, right?
That's facility that's
everything,
growing, it's 4
yes.
acres total.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I
Out of the
misunderstood
20,
that.
and they have to buy the whole 20, but they can only use 4 of it to do this.
Yes.
Okay, so then my second follow-up question is it separated in those 2 zones what they can do? So in the manufacturing, can they only manufacture, and in the agriculture, they can only grow? Or can they do both in either zone?
They can do under code, a grow operation and a production establishment allows for growing and processing the product on the same site.
Okay.
So, and it also, and vice versa. So they could have a production facility and a grow operation on the same site, or they could have a grow operation and not a processing facility, or they could have a processing facility and not a grow. So it basically allows them to do whatever they want out of the 3 different options. So they can either do a production facility, or they can do a grow facility, or they can do both.
What's the acreage requirements on the manufacturing zone?
The maximum is 4 acres on any of it.
So, but how big of a?
Oh, the building size, I don't know on, it's in code, the maximum size the building can
I
be.
think
So
that
if
was
they
a
grow
5
that
acre-
one-
That's a 5-acre lot total, right, on that?
That's
that
for
was it.
grow
Is that what you're
operations.
asking?
So there is a maximum square footage that a processing facility can be.
Okay, and they can, if they grow it in the manufacturing, they can only grow it indoors, or they can grow
No,
that outdoors?
No, they can grow it outdoors, but that could be a condition of approval. I believe that the city could get away with Duncan because of the odor that's comes off.
Saying that
of
needs
those
to be an
plants.
indoor only kind of a
Yes,
thing?
and I did talk to the person at the Department of Agriculture who they've hired to administer this program, and actually came from the industry in another state. And he said 4 acres of cannabis, depending on the cultivar you use, could be very odoriferous. And so I think that if any of these applications do come to us, that would be my recommendation for a condition of approval, that the whole thing be done inside.
Do we have any options for, sorry, I've got lots of questions.
No,
Do we
that's
have
fine.
any options for the agricultural site of making it be, if they have to own 20 acres and they can only develop 4 of it for this purpose, can we assign that 4 acres have to be in the middle to help mitigate that as well?
I think as long as you could tie that was what you were trying to accomplish.
Based off of the odors and
Yes.
based off of trying to hide it so that it's a little bit less of a,
I'm not saying that that's an absolute, but if the city could say that this is how we're mitigating the detrimental impact, then I would support that.
do you feel the same way, Mr. Murray? You don't see any legal reasons why we couldn't get away with that?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to look at the individual circumstances because typically you want to look at the least egregious condition that meets the same result. So, but if we could identify if that's
If they
putting it-
choose to do it outside versus inside,
Right.
the rule could be,
And
let's
if there's no other way
move
to
it to the
accomplish
middle.
the same result or whatever, so we just have to go through that analysis.
Okay, that's great. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
That was a lot more than 2. Commissioner Hatch, okay, Commissioner Hatch.
Well, that raised a question for me, Larry, as regarding if they're only required to develop 4 acres, but they have to purchase 20, can they sell the other remaining 16 acres to another, or do they just have to have that as parking lot?
No, or they don't have to do anything with it. If it's an agricultural zone, they could, I don't know, grow petunias or cabbage or whatever. But in a A20 zone, what that means is it's an agricultural zone with a 20-acre lot minimum. So for us to do any subdivision in the city, it has to be a minimum of 20 acres. You can't, now the reason I didn't put it in the A5 or A1 zone is my concern is that there's some of the A5 zone where they could have purchased the 5 acres and been outside of the 600 foot or 600 feet from a residential zone rule by a couple of 100 feet, but it still would have stuck something like this smack dab in an area that's very residential, but somebody happens to hold on to 20 or 25 acres and they're surrounded by homes. And so to Nicole's point, they could put that production facility right in the middle of that and still, they'd be right in the middle of, and so I felt the A20 zone was better because it's far to the west, and a lot of those large property owners, and they're very reluctant to part with property unless they get a really high dollar amount and small chunks, and usually the only people they get the high dollar amount from are municipalities that want to locate water tanks and so stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. That brings up another question, though. If they purchase 20 acres, they put their facility in the center of the 20 acres, and we have a perimeter or buffer around them, is that just wild growth? Can we require them to maintain it, put in?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, they can't just let it go to weeds and stuff. They'd have to till it and make sure that the weeds are not.
Go to weeds, that's good, right?
Wow.
No pun intended, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Perfect, by the way.
Different kind of weed.
Commissioner Luthi.
Sorry, and the reason behind that is because it's all treated as one lot. So if you're gonna develop any part of the one lot, you gotta develop the whole one lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did we do the public hearing on this?
No.
Okay, that was a lot of questions, I couldn't remember. All right, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing session of this item. And seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring this back to the planning commission for a possible motion. Commissioner Hatch.
I'll make a motion. Based on the findings and information set forth in this staff report and upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for this application. Was I on the right one?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner England.
I'll second that.
We have a motion with a second. Any discussion to the motion? Commissioner Green.
So, just for the record, I'm going to be voting no for this, and it's basically based on the fact that because I have a federal security clearance, I don't want to be seen as undermining federal law. So just so you know why I'm voting no.
Okay, any other discussion to the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion carries 5-1.
Joe, did you need to remove yourself from the comments because of that, or you're okay?
I think I'm okay with that.
Because I am concerned, if that jeopardizes your,
I
okay.
think it's more for the vote than the comments that I made before. I think I'm okay with the previous comments.
Okay. And our final item on the agenda, text amendment for streetscape walls, amending the 2009 City Code, Section 13-14-3G, streetscape walls, citywide applicability. Again, Mr. Gardner, on behalf of the city.
So I'll go through this quickly. In G, in the streetscape walls, what I have, and the reason this came about, as I talked about in the pre-meeting, is that a person who worked for Sandy saw that some of the older walls, there was no maintenance plan for those and no replacement plan, and to the people in Sandy, it was becoming a concern as far as appearance of the city. And so I think out of an abundance of caution, it's just that, if this exact ordinance doesn't get passed by the planning commission or council, I think at least it starts us thinking about these issues, because we do approve a lot of subdivisions with streetscape walls that could be an issue in the future. So anyway, in G, it used to allow opaque masonry or lightweight precast fiber reinforced walls, and that was more generally known as the Rhino Rock product. It's been found that it is good in some applications, but along streets it has proven not to be the best application. Now the people who sell that would beg to differ with me and say it's a very strong product, but anyway, what we feel is that either a laid in place masonry wall or a poured, post and panel masonry product that's actually a complete masonry unit, with reinforced. It's not the Rhino Rock is a foam core that has a shotcrete sprayed on the outside of it. A lot of people like that for some uses because it's lighter weight and easier to maneuver, but adjacent to streets, I think it's better to have a masonry product. And of course, it does give the planning commission an exception if there's something that you have found that an applicant proposes that you feel like is better. The planning commission can approve that. It talks about a strip underneath, the concrete strip underneath the walls. What we have found is that, and we've been requiring this anyway for the last at least 4 or 5 years, that some of the walls, the posts are put in place, the walls are put in, they just sit right on the ground. There tends to be an area where weeds and tree seedlings can get underneath, and it can cause damage to the wall. And then in G1C, an exception. Now, if there's somebody that proposes a very exclusive project or something, and our ordinance, no, you gotta have a masonry wall, although they might propose something else, a really nice landscape feature or something that can serve the purpose. The planning commission has that discretion to approve that. And then finally in 2, before the maintenance, after the warranty period expired, was up to the adjacent property owner. What this section does is obligate the city. The wall is dedicated to this, and this is adjacent only to collector and arterial streets, okay? The wall will be dedicated to the city in the same fashion that curb, gutter, and sidewalk is dedicated to the city. And the city then would be on the hook for the maintenance or repair or ultimate replacement of that wall panel if it was damaged. Now that might not be the only way to go on this, but this is the proposal that's before you. Now I can't promise when this particular ordinance will go to the city council, because there are some, I just don't know if it'll go quickly to the council or not, because it is an odd year to maybe be throwing something like this at that elected body. But anyway, those are my comments. Do you have any questions for me?
Any questions? Commissioner Green?
So the strip underneath the fence, that's what we're referring to as the Mow strip in the ordinance. I'm just sitting here thinking, and this is just something thinking out loud. Obviously, the idea is to try to get the fence lifted up on off the ground a little bit. And I'm just wondering, at the end of the day, does it, concrete's probably the easiest way to keep weeds down. I was just thinking, I'm just thinking out loud right now, if they put, a barrier and rocks under there, if that would also meet the requirement, or if it has to be concrete. And if it has to be concrete, I'm just wondering, do we want to say it has to be a specific width just so that we know what we're getting? I don't know the answers to these. I'm just wondering if it's something that we want to consider. Maybe.
And I think that would go along with, if it's a dedicated to the city, then we would definitely develop standards that would have to.
Commissioner Luthi?
It needs to be concrete. That is industry standard for any kind of anything. It's gotta be concrete. But I do like the idea of having a dedicated width. 18 inches is pretty standard. I think that putting an 18-inch mow curb in there makes a lot of sense.
Any more discussion for staff? Commissioner Green?
I can see where the council might balk at this, because it's gonna be an additional cost to the city. But since we just had the great discussion on signs, obviously one of the things that we're looking towards is the beautification of the city. And I'll give you a perfect example of the lack of beautification, and it's because of the way the streets develop. But if we look at 7800 South between, 19th West and 32nd West, with all the different fences that face 7800 South now, if that's what we're trying to eliminate, I think West Jordan City ought to invest in the maintenance of those kind of walls, because, if we allow it to have something go that way, and like you showed us in the pre-meeting, the pictures at Copper Hills High and over by Copper Hills High and those kind of things, if the goal is for us to have a vibrant, attractive city, I think that's probably one of the things we have to do, is a cost of doing business. And, I hate to say that, because I'm one of those ones that was against House Bill 441 and didn't want any income tax raise or sales tax raise. But at some point in time, I think that's something that if we think it's important to have the city look consistent and nice, I think it's something we have to do. So I think this is the dedicated part of that, and have those walls dedicated to the city. I think that's the right direction we need to, or otherwise we're just gonna look hodgepodge for decades.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, we'll go ahead and open up our public hearing for one last time for the evening. And seeing none, we'll go ahead and close it for the last time for the evening. Bring it back to the commission. Commissioner Hatch, I'm gonna choose because there were 3 of you, so.
Good timing. I think this is a necessary ordinance. I'm going to agree with Commissioner Green. I think to help our city have a cohesive look, I think this is the right step. So I'm going to make a motion that, based on the information and findings set forth in this staff report and upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for this application.
Commissioner Green.
Second.
We have a motion with a second. Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Almost forgot I had to also vote. All right, we have a motion that is carried unanimously. And that brings us to the conclusion of tonight's meeting.
Move to adjourn.
We stand adjourned until April 2nd.